6 weeks after she took the house, the car, and both the children, he spent his last $300 on groceries. Not a lawyer, not a plane ticket. Groceries. 2 books, a folding table, a corner of a parking lot where the morning shift workers walked past without slowing down. Atlanta, early, the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself. He opened the recipe book to the first page. His grandfather's handwriting, blue ink, a note in the margin that said, "Don't rush, let the fire do its work." He lit the burner. Across the city, in the house that used to be his, the paperwork was already filed, the accounts already moved, the attorney already paid. 14 months of careful, invisible work. And she had left him with $300 because her lawyer said it wasn't worth the paperwork. She was wrong about that. 11 months later, a camera crew followed him to work. She watched it on television, alone, in his kitchen. Devin Webb stood in a borrowed kitchen at 4 in the morning. A folding table leaning against the wall. An envelope with $300 sitting on the counter, like it was waiting for him to figure out what to do next. He didn't look at the envelope, he looked at the book. Brown leather cover, worn soft at the corners, the kind of worn that comes from decades of the same hands picking it up the same way. He set it on the counter and opened it to the first page. Blue ink, careful letters that leaned slightly to the right. His grandfather's handwriting. He hadn't opened this book in 4 years. He'd told himself he didn't need to. Told himself he remembered everything. Told himself it was just recipes, just an old man's notes, just paper and ink. He'd been wrong about all of that. Joseph Webb was born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1938, and he lived in the same house on Caldwell Street for 44 years without once feeling the need to explain himself to anybody. He was a retired electrician, spent 30 years rewiring buildings across Shelby County with hands that knew exactly what they were doing and never needed to prove it. When he retired, he turned those same hands to the kitchen, and every Saturday morning, for as long as Devin could remember anything at all, that kitchen was where the whole neighborhood ended up. Joseph cooked for anyone who showed up, didn't ask questions, didn't take money, didn't turn a single person away from that screen door on a Saturday morning, no matter what they looked like or where they came from or how much trouble was written across their face. He just put food on the porch table and let the morning do the rest. Neighbors came, people from 2 streets over came. Men Devin had never seen before and never saw again. They'd sit on the porch steps, eat without speaking, and leave looking like something tight in their chest had finally loosened just enough to get through the next few days. Joseph kept the recipe book on the second shelf above the stove. Brown leather cover, blue ink, 178 pages. 31 years of cooking recorded one dish at a time, with notes in the margins written in slightly smaller letters. The kind of Matt writes when he's talking to himself at 6 in the morning and doesn't expect anyone else to read them. At the bottom of the smothered chicken recipe, in handwriting underlined once, "This one is for when somebody needs to feel better and doesn't know how to ask." Devin was beside Joseph in that kitchen from the time he could stand on a stool and reach the counter. 5 years old, holding a wooden spoon too large for his hand, stirring a pot he couldn't see into properly. Joseph didn't give him small tasks to keep him occupied, he gave him real ones. Stir this, taste that, tell me what's missing. By 10, Devin could make the red beans from memory. By 12, he was running the full Saturday spread while Joseph sat in the lawn chair by the window and watched through the screen. Nodding occasionally, saying nothing unless Devin was about to make a genuine mistake. Across all those Saturday mornings, Joseph said the same thing enough times that it stopped being something Devin heard and became something he simply knew. You feed people and you look them in the eye. That's how you tell someone they matter. Devin heard that at 7. He heard it at 17. He heard it the last morning he spent in that kitchen before he left Memphis at 23 and drove to Atlanta with everything he owned in a borrowed truck, the recipe book riding on the passenger seat beside him. Joseph died 4 years before this story begins. 79 years old, in the house on Caldwell Street, in the bed 12 feet from the kitchen where he had fed half a neighborhood for 3 decades. Devin flew home for the funeral. He sat in that kitchen for 2 hours after everyone else had gone. He didn't cook. He didn't open the book. He just sat at the kitchen table and looked at the stove and the counter and the wooden spoon still hanging from the hook by the window. He flew back to Atlanta the next morning. He put the book on the shelf above the microwave. He did not open it again. Not once in 4 years, not until the night everything else was taken. He met Celeste Grant when he was 26 years old. She was 29, commercial loan officer at a bank in Buckhead. She walked into a room like she'd already decided what was going to happen in it. Wore fitted dresses that sat just above the knee, dark colors mostly, tailored exactly right. Her hair was always done. Silk press, bone straight, falling past her shoulders in a way that looked effortless and absolutely was not. She listened when Devin talked, remembered specific things he said 3 conversations later and brought them back with precision. She had a plan for everything. That was what he noticed first. And what he found genuinely compelling about her. Celeste always had a plan. She moved through the world like someone who had already was waiting for everyone else to catch up. He found that attractive. He wasn't wrong to. He just didn't understand yet what it meant when that planning was turned in a direction he couldn't see. They married when Devin was 28. Small ceremony, 38 guests. Devin cooked the entire reception dinner himself because he wanted to, and because Celeste said it would feel more personal than a catered event. She was right about that. The food was extraordinary. Her colleagues talked about it for weeks. They told Celeste she should have her husband open a restaurant. She laughed and changed the subject. Devin didn't notice at the time they had 2 children. Jalen, born when Devin was 29. Nadia, born when Devin was 32. And when Jalen arrived, Celeste made a suggestion that was practical and made complete sense. Childcare in Atlanta cost more per month than Devin's salary after taxes. Celeste made enough for both of them. It made sense for Devin to stay home. He would raise the children and manage the house and cook, and Celeste would handle the income and the accounts, and this would be a functional division of a shared life. He agreed. 2 years after Jalen was born, Celeste suggested taking over the finances entirely. You focus on the kids. I'll handle the accounts. She worked with numbers every day. She understood mortgage structures and compound interest in ways Devin had never needed to understand. There was no reason not to trust the woman he had built a family beside. He agreed. 3 years after that, she said the house should go into her name alone for the mortgage refinancing. Just a technicality. The loan terms are better with a single borrower, and my credit profile is cleaner for this type of instrument. He signed. He was standing in the kitchen when he signed. He remembered the pen in his hand. He did not remember anyone explaining what those pages actually said. That was how it worked. Each step had a reason. Each reason was practical. Each signature came in the middle of a normal evening while Devin was doing something ordinary. Cooking dinner, folding laundry, sitting at the kitchen table helping with homework while something simmered on the stove. The steps were small. The gaps between them were months, sometimes a year. You don't feel the ground shifting when it moves that slowly. You just wake up one morning and discover you're standing somewhere entirely different than you thought you were, and you have no documentation to prove you were ever anywhere else. Celeste was exceptional at one specific thing above everything else. She controlled the picture. In front of friends, she was the attentive and supportive wife. In front of her bank colleagues, she was the provider, the professional, the woman who had built something stable. In front of the children, she was the mother who planned the family vacations and showed up to every school event. And Devin cooked for every dinner party she hosted, made the food her colleagues talked about for weeks afterward, set the table and refilled the glasses and cleaned up after the last guest left. Celeste introduced him as my husband when the food appeared on the table, as though it had arrived independently of any human effort. She never once said Devin made this. She said we put together a little spread, or the food turned out well, and moved the conversation to something else. Every professional relationship Celeste had built in Atlanta ran through a meal Devin cooked. Every client dinner, every holiday gathering. Every casual Sunday that required him to spend 6 hours in the kitchen. His hands built the foundation of her professional life. His name was on none of it, not on the bank accounts, not on the mortgage, not on the investment portfolio. Not on the car title. Not on the credit cards. 12 years of cooking and raising 2 children and hosting every dinner and managing every household detail, and his name did not appear on a single document that carried any legal weight. He didn't notice. That's the true and terrible thing about control applied slowly over a long period of time. You trust the person applying it. And so you sign the papers and agree to the arrangements and believe in the logic of each individual step. Right up until the morning you find yourself with nothing in your name. Celeste began planning the divorce 14 months before Devin knew anything was wrong. She hired Roland Chase, 55 years old, family asset attorney with an office in Sandy Springs. 26 years of practice. A reputation in Atlanta's legal community as someone who approached divorce cases the way an engineer approaches a load-bearing structure. He didn't deal in emotion. He dealt in architecture. Where are the weak points? How do you build something that holds under pressure? In the March before the papers were served, Roland restructured the mortgage. The house on Collier Road, the house where Jalen learned to walk and Nadia said her first word and Devin cooked 10,000 meals in the kitchen off the back hallway, went through a refinancing that transferred the deed entirely into Celeste's name. She brought the papers home on a Wednesday evening and placed them on the kitchen counter while Devin was making dinner. She said the bank had offered a significantly better rate, said it would save them close to $400 a month. Said he just needed to sign the last 2 pages. He signed June, the joint savings account, $41,000, transferred to an individual account in Celeste's name at a different branch. The monthly statement stopped coming to the house. Devin didn't notice because he hadn't looked at a bank statement in 6 years. Celeste handled the finances. That was their arrangement. In September, the investment account was restructured. In November, the car title was updated. In January, the credit cards carrying Devin's name were closed. Fraud alert on the account, Celeste explained. The replacements came in her name alone. 14 months, 7 documents. Every one of them signed or processed while Devin cooked dinner and helped Jalen with his science project and drove Nadia Sad to her Saturday art class and trusted without reservation the woman he had believed in for 12 years. The papers arrived on a Thursday afternoon in April. Devin was in the kitchen. He had just turned off the stove. He was standing at the counter with a dish towel in his hands when he heard Celeste come through the front door. She set the envelope on the counter between the salt shaker and the bowl of fruit. She was still in her work clothes. Dark wrap dress, fitted at the waist, hem just above the knee, hair straight and smooth against her shoulders, her bag still over her shoulder. Her face composed in the way it always was when she had already processed something and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Devin picked up the envelope. He opened it. He read the first page, standing at the counter, did not sit down. Stood in the kitchen that was no longer legally his, in the house that was no longer legally his, and read every page of the 23-page document, from the first line to the last. He read about the dissolution of the marriage. He read about the custody petition. He read about the asset distribution, which was precisely what it sounds like when all assets have been legally transferred into a single name before the filing date. He read about the financial records that would be submitted to the court, records showing Celeste as the sole provider. Records showing Devin as a dependent with no independent income, no individual bank accounts, no employment history for 10 years, and no assets in his own name. He read all 23 pages. Then he set them down on the counter exactly where the envelope had been. He looked at Celeste. She was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the hallway, watching him read. Neither of them spoke. The silence in that kitchen was the kind that comes as something that has already been done denied. Both people in the room know it. Devin put the dish towel on the counter. He walked out of the kitchen. The custody hearing took 6 weeks. Roland's team moved fast because they had been moving for 14 months already, and the groundwork was complete. On paper, Devin Webb did not exist as an independent financial entity. On paper, he was a man who had spent 12 years inside someone else's financial life and had nothing to show for it. The judge granted Celeste temporary primary custody of Jalen and Nadia pending the completion of divorce proceedings. Temporary. The word didn't feel temporary to Devin. It felt like something closing. Not a door, something heavier, something that doesn't open again from the outside. He packed 1 suitcase that Friday morning. Clothes, the recipe book from the shelf above the microwave, and the photograph tucked inside the front cover. Joseph Webb standing in front of the kitchen on Caldwell Street, 1985. 47 years old, white apron, hands dusted with flour, smiling like he knew something nobody else had figured out yet. There was $300 left in an old checking account that neither Celeste nor Roland had located. The account had opened in the first year of the marriage under the name of Devin's great-aunt Dorothy Webb, with Devin listed as a secondary account holder. Dorothy had died 3 years earlier, and the account had never been formally closed. On the bank system, it displayed under D. Webb, not Devin Webb alone. Roland had run his financial search on Devin Webb. The account hadn't surfaced. The balance was $300. Even if it had surfaced, Roland's assessment would have been the same as it turned out to be when he learned of it later. $300 is not a material asset, not worth the paperwork. $300 was the one thing they missed. It was the one thing that mattered. Dre Collins pulled up at 10:15 in the morning. Brown sedan, engine running. Dre was 41 years old, a night shift nurse at Grady Memorial, working 4 nights a week. He and Devin had been close for 11 years, since Devin's second year in Atlanta back when they were both in the same building, and Devin used to leave food outside Dre's door on nights Dre came home from a double shift too tired to cook. Dre didn't get out of the car, he didn't need to. Devin came down the front steps with the suitcase, put it in the back seat, got in and closed the door. Dre pulled away from the curb. Devin didn't look back at the house. He looked at the recipe book on his lap. Brown leather cover, blue ink inside, 178 pages, a photograph of a man in a white apron tucked inside the front cover. No house, no car, 2 children beside him, no credit, no employment history, no account with his name on it. No paper trail proving that 12 years of his life had been real and had mattered and had built something worth taking. She took the house, she took the car, she took the children. She took 12 years of his hands in that kitchen and erased them from every document that existed. She left him with $300 and a recipe book. She thought she'd left him with nothing. Dre's apartment was on Glenwood Avenue in East Atlanta. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled like coffee brewed 12 hours earlier, a living room with a gray couch, and a window looking out over the parking lot. Devin slept on the couch, a blanket from the hall closet, a pillow from the spare room, the $300 in an envelope inside his bag on the floor. The first 3 days, Devin didn't leave the apartment, didn't eat much, sat by the window and watched the parking lot and the street and the people walking to wherever they needed to be. And he thought about the voicemail from Jalen he hadn't returned yet. Jalen asking when his dad was coming back. Jalen saying Nadia kept asking too. He couldn't tell his son he was coming back because he didn't know if that was true. Couldn't tell him he was fine because he was sitting on a borrowed couch with $300 and no honest answer to offer anyone. He put the phone face down on the cushion. 3 days of nothing, 3 days of sitting and not calling and trying to work out what the sequence of events was supposed to be from here. No employment history for a decade, no credit score worth mentioning, no professional references in food that weren't 12 years old. No assets, no savings, no plan. The 4th night Dev couldn't sleep, Dre was at work. The apartment was dark and quiet except for the occasional sound of a car on Glenwood Avenue. Devin lay on the couch staring at the ceiling and tried to figure out what the next move was supposed to be. Nothing came, nothing concrete, nothing actionable. Just the ceiling and the dark and the weight of 12 years condensed into a single suitcase on the floor. He sat up. He reached into the bag beside the couch and pulled out the recipe book. He held it without opening it. The leather was exactly as he remembered, worn and specific in the way objects become specific when they've been touched by the same hands for a very long time. He had carried this book from Memphis to Atlanta 17 years ago. He had put it on the shelf in 7 different apartments in 2 different houses. He had opened it constantly in the first years and then less and then not at all. He had told himself it was just recipes. Just an old man's notes, just paper and ink. He opened it. The photograph slid out of the front cover and landed on his lap. Joseph Webb, 1985, the same expression. The look of someone who has figured out something essential and is entirely at peace about it. Not smug, just settled. Devin held the photograph and sat there without moving for a long time. Then he turned to the first page. Joseph's handwriting, blue ink, careful letters sloping slightly to the right. The recipe for red beans and rice, and in the margin in slightly smaller script, don't rush the roux. Let the fire do its work. He turned the page, fried catfish, and beside the measurements more salt at the end. Always at the end. He turned another page, smothered chicken. At the bottom, underlined once, this one is for when somebody needs to feel better and doesn't know how to ask. Every page had a note. Every note sounded like Joseph standing right there in that dark apartment talking the way Joseph had always talked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steady and certain and present, the way some people are present even in rooms they haven't been in for years. Devin closed the book. He held it against his chest for a while. Then he got up. He was in the kitchen when Dre came home at 7:15 in the morning. The burners were on. The apartment smelled like brown butter and cast iron and something deeper underneath, not just food. Something more specific. The smell of a particular family, a particular book, a particular set of hands learning the same movements from the same source across 2 generations. Dre stood in the doorway in his scrubs work bag still on his shoulder and looked at Devin standing at the stove. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Devin spoke first. "I need to find somewhere to sell this." Dre set his bag down. "I know a Saturday market." Devin divided the $300 on the kitchen table that afternoon, $85 for the food handler's permit and a temporary vendor license from Fulton County. $140 for ingredients, $40 for containers, foil trays, plastic forks, napkins, $35 left as a buffer. He took the bus to the Fulton County Health Department on a Tuesday morning. Stood in line for 2 hours, paid the $85, received a card, a permit number, and a 2-sided sheet listing what he was and was not permitted to do under Georgia food safety regulations. He read it twice on the bus home. He bought the ingredients at the discount grocery on Memorial Drive: chicken thighs. A 10-pound bag of rice, dried red beans, cooking oil, spices, foil trays from the restaurants and supply store on Moreland. 40 containers, a sleeve of plastic forks, a stack of napkins. He carried everything back on the bus. He cooked Thursday night in Dre's kitchen, preparing what he could in advance, working from the recipe book open on the counter, the pages he knew best. Smothered chicken, red beans. He worked slowly, without rushing, because rushing a dish before it was ready produced a dish that tasted like a rush. And Joseph Webb had never rushed a dish in his life. Saturday morning, 5:45. Devin loaded 2 large pots and a folding table borrowed from Greater Hope Baptist, Dre's church, where Devin had attended 3 times in the past year, onto the bus. 9 stops to the East Atlanta Village Community Market on Flat Shoals Avenue. He set up at the far end of the vendor row, between a woman selling handmade candles and a man selling custom cutting boards. The other vendors had printed tablecloths and banner stands and credit card readers, and the full infrastructure of small businesses that had been doing this for years. Devin had a folding table, 2 pots, 40 foil containers, and a piece of cardboard written on in black marker with his prices and what he was serving. 6 in the morning to 9. He sold 4 containers in the first 3 hours. People walked past, some slowed. Some looked at the handwritten cardboard, at the table with no canopy, and kept walking. Devin stood behind the table and didn't call out to anyone. Didn't wave people over, didn't pitch his food. He stood there and waited. The food doesn't need to sell itself by being loud. It sells itself by being good. That was Joseph's understanding. Devin had inherited it completely. At 11:40, a woman stopped. She was somewhere in her middle 50s. Church hat, good coat, a Sunday morning quality to how she was put together, even though it was a Saturday. She looked at the cardboard. She looked at Devin. She bought 1 container, opened it right there at the table. And stood in the November morning air and ate. She didn't say anything for close to a minute. Then she looked at Devin with an expression he recognized immediately. The expression of someone who has just tasted something that matches a very old memory precisely. Her voice was quiet and certain. "This tastes like my grandmother's kitchen." She bought 3 more containers, asked Devin his name, asked if he'd be here next Saturday. He told her yes. By 2 in the afternoon, Devin had sold 19 containers at $5 each, $95. Minus the 48 he'd spent on ingredients and supplies for the day. $47 on the bus ride back to Glenwood Avenue. $47. Not enough for rent, not enough for a deposit anywhere, not enough for anything except ingredients for next Saturday. But a woman had come back for more, and she had said it tasted like her grandmother's kitchen. That was the number that mattered. Not 47 on the left side of the ledger. One woman who had recognized something true in a foil container on a folding table on a Saturday morning in November. Understood, standing on that bus with the empty pots at his feet, that this was the thing you built from. Not capital, not infrastructure, not a business plan. A person who came back week 2, 28 containers, week 3, 35. Week 4, 40 containers sold out before 1 in the afternoon. The numbers didn't jump. They climbed the way a good fire builds, slowly, without drama, adding heat in a consistent direction. Devin's noticed the same faces reappearing. Mrs. Loretta Hines came back the second Saturday and brought her neighbor. A man in work boots starts up every week and buying 2 containers without looking at the price. A group of young people from the neighborhood found the table on the 3rd Saturday and stood eating directly from the trays on the sidewalk, not bothering to move anywhere else. And then a problem appeared. Not a crisis, not yet, but the kind of quiet problem that sits in the back of your mind and gets louder the longer you ignore it. Devin was cooking in Dre's kitchen. Under Georgia's cottage food regulations, certain home kitchen items could be sold to consumers legally. Baked goods, some preserves, shelf-stable items. But prepared meals with meat and rice and fresh ingredients sold at public markets, those required a licensed commercial kitchen. Inspected, certified. Devin had been selling for 4 weeks. He had been in violation of the health code for 4 weeks without knowing it. He found out on a Wednesday afternoon at the public library on Ponce de Leon Avenue. No laptop, no internet at Dre's apartment. He sat at a library computer for 3 hours and read the Georgia Department of Agriculture cottage food regulations line by line. Then the Fulton County Food Service regulations. Then he searched for licensed shared-use commercial kitchens facilities in Atlanta, $15 to $25 an hour. He did the math on the back of a grocery receipt. 4 hours of cooking per week at $15 an hour was $60. He would need to sell at least 25 containers just to cover the kitchen rental before ingredients and bus fare and supplies. He sat with that number for a while. A food truck would solve everything. Cook and sell from the same vehicle. Go where the customers were instead of waiting for them to find a folding table in a parking lot. He searched for used food trucks. $20,000 to $40,000 for something that ran. He closed that tab. He didn't have $20,000. He had $47 a week and a folding table and a permit that technically covered nothing he was actually doing. So he did what made sense. He registered for 3 markets instead of 1. Grant Park on Tuesdays, Kirkwood on Thursdays. East Atlanta Village on Saturdays. 3 revenue streams. 3 chances to cover the cost of going legal. And he started at selling sebedi about commercial kitchen options because Dre had learned in the way that night shift nurses know a city. Not through brochures, but through conversations at 3 in the morning with people who actually live in it. Dre mentioned Greater Hope Baptist Church. Pastor Diane Morse had been running Greater Hope Baptist on Jonesboro Road for 22 years. 67 years old. The kind of woman who had long since stopped needing anyone to tell her she was capable of something. She had a certified commercial kitchen in the church basement that she rented to small vendors on a sliding scale. $15 an hour for first-time renters. Available Monday through Wednesday mornings. Devin called the church office on a Thursday. Booked his first session for the following Monday. The first Monday he arrived at 4 in the morning. Let himself in with the code the church secretary had given him. Stood in the kitchen and looked at the commercial range and the stainless prep counter and the walk-in refrigerator. He thought about Joseph's kitchen on Caldwell Street. Never anything as official as this, never anything certified or inspected, just a gas stove and a wooden counter and a screen door that stayed open on warm mornings. He opened the recipe book on the prep counter. He started cooking. Pastor Diane had been watching Devin for 6 weeks before she said anything to him directly. She didn't come down the first week, or the second. She stayed in her office upstairs and paid attention to what came through the vents when he was working in the basement kitchen. Because she had rented that kitchen to enough people the years to know the difference between someone going through the motions and someone doing actual work. The smell of Devin's kitchen was work, not performance, not effort, work. The specific smell of someone who had learned to cook young enough that the process had become part of how they occupied space rather than something they did separately from themselves. She came downstairs during his second session and stood in the doorway for 10 minutes without speaking. Watched him break down chickens at the prep counter with the speed and economy of someone who had been doing this his whole life. Then she went back upstairs. She came down again at the end of his 4th session. After he had finished cleaning the kitchen to a standard she hadn't seen from a renter in years. She told him to sit. He sat. Her voice was direct. No performance in it. I've been smelling your food for 6 weeks. I've been watching you carry those pots in here before the sun comes up. I've been watching you clean this kitchen better than most people clean their own homes. She looked at him steadily. What are you doing and who are you doing it for? Devin told her, short sentences. No self-pity, the divorce, the papers, the custody arrangement, the $300, the markets, the bus rides, and then he told her about Joseph. About Caldwell Street. About the recipe book open on the prep counter every single morning because cooking from it meant Joseph was in the kitchen with him. Pastor Diane listened to all of it. Then she told him something back. Her husband Thomas had died 11 years ago. 61 years old. Heart attack on a Sunday morning before the 10 o'clock service. Thomas had been a deacon at Greater Hope for 20 years. And on weekends, he'd owned a food truck, green and white, bought second-hand in 2008. Parked in the gravel lot behind the fellowship hall every Sunday after service. Ribs, pulled pork, coleslaw, cornbread, $5 a plate. The line went around the building. When Thomas died, Pastor Diane couldn't bring herself to sell the truck. She covered it with a canvas tarp and left it in the back lot that had been 11 years ago. The engine hadn't turned over in 7. 2 tires flat on the passenger side. The gas line to the interior burners needed replacing. The refrigeration unit hadn't worked in years. Every year she told herself she would decide what to do with it. Every year November came and she still hadn't. "Come with me," she said. She walked Devin through the fellowship hall and around to the gravel lot. She pulled the tarp back, faded green paint cracked in long strips, flat tires, every window covered in dust. A dent in the rear bumper that nobody had ever bothered to fix because Thomas always said he'd get to it and never did. Devin walked to the side door and pulled it open. It stuck, then gave, with the sound of metal that hadn't moved in years. He stepped inside, 2 gas burners intact, a prep counter along the interior wall, a small refrigerator beneath it that would need work. A service window on the passenger side with a metal shutter stuck halfway open. He stood inside the truck for a long moment. He put both hands on the prep counter, looked at the burners, the window, the space where the containers would be passed out and the people outside would receive them. He could see it. For the first time since the couch on Glenwood Avenue, he could see clearly what the next thing was supposed to look like. Pastor Diane's voice came from outside. "I'm not giving this to you. Thomas built this business and I won't give it away. But I'll rent it to you for $100 a month, so you fix it yourself. If it runs and your business holds for 6 months, I'll sell it to you at what Thomas you paid for it in 2008. $4,500. Devin stepped back out onto the gravel. "I don't have money to fix it. You have a church full of people who know how to fix things." She didn't pause. Asked him, as Terence was 46 years old, a mechanic and a member of Greater Hope for 19 years. He looked at the engine on a Saturday morning and told Devin the fuel pump was dead, the battery was gone, and the alternator was corroded beyond salvaging. Parts would run around $350. He would do the labor for free because Pastor Diane had asked. And because Terence believed even that a man willing to carry parts onto a city bus at 5 in the morning deserved a truck that started. Delonda was 40 years old, worked at a bottle shop in College Park and offered to sand and repaint the exterior in exchange for 2 months of meals once the truck was running. Devin agreed. The parts cost $347. Devin paid him 5 weeks of market earnings, setting aside a fixed amount each week. Terence worked 3 consecutive Saturdays. Delonda came in the evenings after her regular shifts, working under the lot's exterior lights with the focused patience of someone who did this kind of work, because she was good at it and not for any other reason. 3 weeks from the first Saturday Terence opened the hood, the engine turned over. First time in 7 years, new tires. Reconnected gas line. A replacement compressor for the refrigeration unit ordered and installed on the 4th Saturday. Delonda painted the exterior in deep brown that dried to the color of good cast iron. Then she handed Devin the gold paint and stepped back. He cut the letters from cardboard and taped them to the panel one at a time. Painted over them slowly, pulled the stencil away but it was still wet. The letters dried bold and permanent against the brown. Joseph's table, his grandfather's name, on a truck that ran in a gravel lot behind a church on Jonesboro Road in southeast Atlanta. Devin stood in front of it for a few minutes after the last coat dried. He didn't say anything. He looked at the name and the service window and the road beyond that went in every direction. Then he reached into his jacket and took out the photograph. Joseph Webb, 1985. White apron, flower-scented hands. That same expression, the one that looked like someone who had worked out something essential and was at peace about it. Devin went inside the truck. He taped the photograph to the wall beside the service window where he would see it every time he looked up from the prep counter. Then he turned on both burners. The flame caught, even and clean. He put his hands on the counter. He opened the recipe book. He started cooking. The first morning, Joseph's table operated as a real business. Not a folding table at a Saturday market, not a borrowed kitchen at a church basement, but an actual truck on an actual street with an actual service window. Devin got there at 5:30 and sat in the cab for 11 minutes before he turned on the burners. Not because he was nervous, or maybe a little, though he wouldn't have called it that. He sat in the dark cab with the city still mostly asleep and looked at Joseph's photograph on the wall beside the service window. And he thought about a Saturday morning on Caldwell Street when he was 8 years old and Joseph had run the full spread alone for the first time. Devin had burned the first batch of cornbread and oversalted the beans. Joseph had eaten both without mentioning either, said only, "The okra is perfect." Start the next time and work outward from what's right. Devin turned on the burners at 5:41. Prep done by 6:15. Smothered chicken in the pan by 7. Red beans on a low simmer, enough rice steaming to cover the first wave of customers whenever they arrived. He was parked on Wells Street in the industrial corridor south of Turner Field. He had scouted the location the week before, standing on the sidewalk at lunchtime and counting foot traffic for 40 minutes. Warehouse workers heading to parking lots, truck drivers coming off loading docks, construction crews from the site 2 blocks north walking to a sandwich cart on the corner that ran out of food every day before 1 o'clock. The sandwich cart ran out before the afternoon shift got hungry. Devin knew what he was looking at. He opened the service window at 11:30. The first customer arrived at 11:42, a warehouse shift supervisor, 52 years old. The kind of man everyone called Big Earl because his presence in a room had long since outgrown any other description. He had forearms built like structural lumber and the unhurried manner of someone who has long since stopped performing patience and simply has it. He looked at the handwritten menu board Devin had mounted above the window. Smothered chicken, extra rice, how much? $7. Big Earl paid, took his container to the wall along the warehouse lot and sat on it and ate without talking. When he finished, he looked back at the truck for a long moment. Then he went to work. He came back the next day at 11:45. Same order, extra rice. Day 3, he brought 2 men from his crew. Day 4. By the end of the second week, Big Earl was arriving with 7 construction workers from the site to north, all of whom had apparently been surviving on gas station food for 3 months because a proper meal required a 15-minute drive they didn't have. They had 7 minutes. 7 minutes was enough for Devin. Week 1 on the truck, 32 plates. Revenue after ingredient cost, 86 cents per dollar on smothered chicken, 72 on red beans. Minus fuel, minus the $100 monthly rental fee divided across operating days, minus the weekly portion of permit costs. Net income per working day, $41. Not enough for rent, not enough for a deposit anywhere, not enough to prove anything to a judge's clerk reviewing a financial disclosure form. But enough to keep the truck running and the window open. Which was exactly enough. Devin tracked every dollar in a composition notebook bought at a drugstore on Jonesboro Road. Revenue on the left page, costs on the right, notes at the bottom in smaller writing, observations about what moved and what didn't. Catfish sells out first on Fridays, make more Thursday night, red beans slow midweek, push Thursday, and on a Tuesday in the 3rd week circle twice, corn muffins. They're asking. He started the corn muffins the following Monday. Page C3 of Joseph's book. A section Joseph had titled simply "The Bread," in capitals as though no further specification was required. The muffins sold out by noon on the first day. Devin noted the time and doubled the batch the following week. Week 2, 37 plates. Week 3, 41. The construction crew had become regulars with the predictability of a scheduled delivery. Big Earl arrived at 11:45 every working day, and Devin had the order ready at 11:43 because that was the kind of kitchen Devin ran. He knew his customers. He knew what they wanted before they arrived. He had it waiting. By the end of the first month, Devin was selling 40 plates a day at $7 each. $280 in daily gross revenue. Cost per plate running $3.50 with ingredients purchased in bulk from the restaurant supply warehouse on Metropolitan Parkway. The margin was real, not comfortable, not yet, but real and moving in the right direction. And then Simone Grant showed up. Celeste's younger sister, 33 years old. She walked up to the service window on a Thursday afternoon like she was just another customer, which she absolutely was not. Dark knotless braids falling past her shoulders, a fitted dress that suited her well, the kind of woman who looked good without trying to, which somehow made it more noticeable. She ordered the smothered chicken, paid for it, found a spot to stand near the truck, ate it without rushing. When she was done, she folded the empty container neatly. Which nobody does, which is the kind of thing you notice. She came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. The 3rd Thursday, she didn't order right away. She looked at Devin through the service window. "I'm Simone Celeste's sister." He knew who she was. He'd met her twice at family gatherings years ago. He waited. I know what she did. And I don't agree with any of it. That was all she said. She ordered her food. She left. Devin stood at the service window for a moment after she walked away. He was careful about this. Because Simone was Celeste's sister, that didn't go away just because she was saying the right things. People could say the right things for any number of reasons. And Devin had spent 12 years missing things that were happening directly in front of him. He wasn't going to do that again. But Simone came back the following week and helped wipe down the prep counter and window after the lunch rush without being asked and without making it a production. She brought a case of napkins and a box of disposable gloves the week after that. She asked how the custody hearing had gone in plain language and listened to this without redirecting it toward herself. She was showing up consistently, asking useful questions, offering practical help. Devin began to trust her, not fully, not in the way he had trusted Celeste. But enough. He was wrong about what was actually happening. 6 months before the divorce papers were served, while Devin was still in the house on Collier Road, still cooking dinner every night, signing whatever papers Celeste slid across the counter, Celeste had called Simone. The conversation lasted less than 4 minutes. Celeste didn't threaten. She didn't raise her voice. She stated, flat language of someone communicating a decision rather than negotiating one, that she expected Simone to keep her informed about Devin's situation as proceedings developed. And that if Simone chose not to, Celeste would remove her name from the mortgage co-signing agreement. Simone knew exactly what that meant. She had bought a townhouse in Smyrna 3 years earlier.
2 bedrooms.
A place she had been slowly fixing up on weekends, new fixtures, fresh paint, a garden in the back. She had started from bare dirt. The mortgage carried a balance of $183,000. Celeste had co-signed the original loan because Simone's credit at the time had been solid, but not quite sufficient for the loan amount alone. Without Celeste's name on the agreement, the bank would reassess. Simone's current credit profile would not independently support the mortgage. She would lose the house. She sat with that calculation for a long time. She didn't like any part of it. But she arrived at a conclusion. She could not afford to lose the house, so she called Devin every week. She asked careful, natural-sounding questions. And she reported what she learned to the Celeste minutes of hanging up. She told herself she was only passing along general information. Nothing that would be used as a weapon. She told herself Devin would be fine regardless. She told herself a lot of things in the evenings after sending those messages. Sitting in her car in whatever parking lot she happened to be in, not quite ready to go inside anywhere. The first message had been about the truck. She had called Devin on a Thursday and he had mentioned the name and the location. 22 minutes after they hung up, she sent Celeste a text. He got a food truck, named it after his grandfather. Parked on Wells Street for lunch. She sat in her car for 16 minutes after sending it. The second message had been about the custody filing. The attorney's name, the timeline. She sent Celeste the information within the hour. She sat in her car for 24 minutes that time. By the 5th month, she had begun leaving things out of the reports. Small details first, then less peripheral things. She didn't analyze why. She told herself she was being judicious about relevance. But the truth was the gap between who she was presenting herself as to Devin and who she was actually being had become harder to sustain. And leaving things out was the only way she had found to manage it without fully confronting what she was doing. Maya Dawson came to the truck. Simone called Devin on a Wednesday. The conversation covered the usual ground. Business, the kids, the apartment. And then Simone asked a question she hadn't asked before. Someone mentioned a reporter came by the truck. What's that about? Devin told her. A local news segment about small business owners in Atlanta. Maya had approached him as a customer first, then asked about being featured in a series she was producing. Nothing about the divorce or the custody situation, just the food. Just the story of how he started. Simone said that sounded wonderful. Said she was proud of what Devin was building. She sent Celeste a text 14 minutes later. Reporter named Maya Dawson from Channel 8. Small business series. Filming starts Monday. She typed it sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store in Smyrna. Engine running. Watching the automatic doors open and close for people doing nothing more complicated than buying milk and going home. She sat there for 31 minutes. She drove home without going inside the store. Maya Dawson was 35 years old and had been doing local news long enough to know the difference between a story and a story. She'd found Joseph's table 3 weeks earlier the same way a lot of people were finding it, through a shared post on a neighborhood Facebook group with a caption that said simply, "Go to Well Street on your lunch break." Up. Trust me, she had twice. Then a third time. The third time she waited until the lunch rush thinned and then leaned against the service window and introduced herself. Up. Devin had heard this kind of pitch before. He'd worked in restaurants. He knew how journalists talked when they wanted something. But Maya wasn't pitching. She was asking. There's a series I'm putting together, small businesses in Atlanta that started from nothing. Your story fits, but only if you're comfortable. I don't want to do anything that doesn't feel right to you. Devin looked at her for a moment. One condition. I cook the way I cook. I don't perform for the camera. She nodded. That's exactly what I want. Maya and a two-person crew arrived at the church kitchen on Jonesboro Road at 4:15 in the morning. Devin was already there, burners on, recipe book open on the prep counter to page 47, smothered chicken. Same page he'd been working from on Monday mornings for 3 months. Maya told him what she'd told him before. No performance, no explaining anything to the lens, no acknowledgement of the camera. Just cook the way you cook. Devin cooked the way he cooked. He didn't glance at the camera. He measured and tasted it and adjusted and moved through the kitchen with the same economy he'd had since he was 8 years old, standing on a stool in his grandfather's house on Caldwell Street. The motion of someone who learned this work young enough that it became part of how he occupied space. The crew filmed the recipe book open on the counter. The blue ink handwriting, the margin notes. They filmed Devin's hands on the prep counter. They filmed the moment he tasted from the wooden spoon, tilted his head slightly, reached for the salt without looking. They followed him to the truck, filmed the drive to Wells Street in the early dark, filmed the setup, window cranked open, burners lit in the interior unit, first container staged on the prep ledge. Filmed the line forming at 11:25 before Devin had opened the window, a line that stretched past the warehouse wall by noon. Between the lunch and evening shifts, Devin sat on the prep stool inside the truck with his hands in his lap. Maya asked questions from outside the service window. He told her he started with $300 and a folding table and a recipe book his grandfather left him when he left Memphis 17 years ago. He didn't say Celeste's name, didn't describe the divorce, didn't reach for anything beyond what was asked. His voice was level when the harder words came. I lost everything I thought I had, and then I found everything I actually needed. The camera moved to the recipe book on the prep counter. Brown leather cover, Joseph's careful handwriting in blue ink, the margin notes, the photograph taped to the wall beside the service window. The one Devin had put there on the day the truck first ran, the one that had been there every day since. Maya interviewed 3 customers. Big Earl looked directly into the lens with his unhurried certainty. Man puts love in the food. You can taste the difference between food made because somebody had to and food made because somebody wanted to, Mrs. Loretta Hines, the woman in the church hat, the one from the very first Saturday at East Atlanta Village, who came back every week, looked at camera with the composure of someone who has already said the true thing once and is entirely comfortable saying it again. This food reminds me of home. I don't know how he does it, but it's real. Celeste received Simone's message at 7:48 in the evening. She read it twice. Then she called Roland Chase. Roland was near the end of his dinner when the call came in. He listened to what Celeste had. Was quiet for a moment, organizing his approach before articulating it. A news segment about the food truck doesn't create legal exposure on its own. Celeste cut through it. It's a reporter doing a feel-good series about a man who rebuilt his life after his wife left him with nothing. The entire framing will be about the divorce as context. That's the story she's selling. Roland considers this. I can draft a cease and desist to the station. Preemptive. Cover defamation, false lie, atrocious interference with legal proceedings. Do it. Roland drafted the letter and sent it by certified mail and email the following morning. Addressed to Maya Dawson at the news affiliate, with a copy to the station's legal department. The letter stated that any broadcast content referenced Celeste or the details of the Webb divorce proceedings would be considered defamatory and would result in immediate legal action. The word immediate appeared 4 times. This was Celeste's mistake, not the instinct to protect herself. That was understandable, even if the foundation of what she was protecting was rotten. The mistake was the specific action she chose. Because Roland had made an assumption that didn't hold, he assumed the station would back down. Most small local affiliates did when they received letters on law firm letterhead with firm language in them. Roland had sent 14 similar letters over his career, and 13 had produced exactly the result he intended. The executive producer at Maya's station was not the 14th version of that pattern. His name was Keith Warren. He'd been producing local news for 22 years and had a well-developed legal letters sent to silence coverage. He read Roland's letter twice, set it on his desk, called Maya into his office. She sat across from him. He slid the letter across the desk without speaking. She read it, looked up. The segment was going to be 2 minutes, Warren said. A food truck story, end of the 6 o'clock. He leaned back in his chair. Why is a family asset attorney sending cease and desist letters to a local news station about a story on a food truck? Maya didn't answer immediately. That's the story, Warren said. That's the real story. A woman who spent 14 months legally restructuring assets before filing for divorce, leaving her husband with no legal claim to anything they built together, now using an attorney to prevent local news from covering what he built with the $300 she left him. He picked up the letter and looked at it again. This is a power story, a control story, 8 minutes in prime time. Not 2 minutes. At the end of the 6 o'clock, he set the letter down. Tell him we're expanding. I want 3 days of footage. Celeste had sent a legal letter to stop a story about a food truck. What she got instead was a story about herself. About what it looks like when someone uses legal instruments to silence the people they've already taken everything from. She had turned a local segment into a prime-time broadcast about the architecture of control and what happens when it's built on other people's labor and trust. She had done it herself with one phone call to her attorney. The segment aired on a Thursday evening, prime time. 8 minutes. Title card over an opening shot of the truck on Wells Street in morning light. Joseph's table, one man. $300, a recite book. Devin watched it from the studio apartment on Memorial Drive. He had signed the lease 2 months earlier. $850 a month. His name on the contract, his name on the mailbox, the first document with his name on it that had mattered in a long time. He sat on the floor with his back against the bed frame. He still didn't own a couch, had been putting it off the way people put off comfort purchases when they're not yet certain the ground beneath them will hold. The composition notebook was on his knee from habit. He watched 8 minutes of his own life presented back through the lens of someone who had recognized what a teach meant before he fully had. He watched Big Earl eating on the wall at the warehouse lot. He watched Mrs. Hines say, "This food reminds me of home." He watched his own hands on the prep counter and felt briefly the strange displacement of seeing yourself from the outside. Not the version you carry internally, the version other people receive. When it ended, he sat without moving for a while. Then he opened the composition notebook and wrote, "Revenue up, potential shift, don't change anything. Stay on the food," he called Dre. I watched it, Devin said. And Devin thought of honestly. Joseph would have said it was too much talking and not enough food. Dre laughed, the real one. The frequency Devin hadn't heard in months. It sounded like something returning to its correct position. Within 48 hours, the Facebook page had gone from 1,200 followers to 23,000. The line at Wells Street the following Monday was longer than the truck's entire street frontage. Devin ran out of food at 12:41, which had never happened. He stood at the service window looking at 8 people still in line and felt the precise frustration of a craftsman who hasn't made enough of the thing he makes. He recalibrated, doubled the prep volume starting Tuesday, extended the morning session by 90 minutes, ordered supplies in larger quantities. 3 other news affiliates contacted Maya requesting permission to use the original footage. The clip moved through social media with the velocity of things that land on something true. 200,000 views in the first week. The shares came with short captions. The kind people write when they want to say this, I meant it, but don't have language for why exactly. You need to see this. This is what real looks like. Watch. A food writer at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution came to the Wells Street location on a Wednesday, stood in line for 22 minutes, and wrote a 700-word piece that ran online Thursday morning. One sentence about the smothered chicken. It tastes like someone made it specifically for you, on a day when you needed it. Revenue pushed past $300 a day in the second week after the broadcast, then $350. The left page of the composition notebook was getting crowded. Devin had started a second one. Month 2, he added a second location. Downtown, Peachtree Street at Andrew Young International Boulevard. 5 in the evening to 8, the after-work corridor. Office workers in dress clothes heading for parking decks. Hospital staff coming off shift at Grady, a few blocks west. He had watched the foot traffic on 3 separate evenings before committing. Standing on the sidewalk counting people for 30 minutes each time. The evening location worked. Different crowd, different rhythm, same fundamental thing. People tired and hungry who walked past the window and smelled what was on the burners and stopped. The evening trade pushed daily revenue after costs to $150 on a solid day. Still not enough to satisfy what a judge's clerk would want to see on a financial disclosure form. But closer, measurably closer. Month 3, his phone started ringing. Not investors, not press. Just customers who had gotten the number off the side of the truck, white digits painted on the brown panel, 3 inches tall. Calling to ask where he was parked on a given day. You on Wells Street tomorrow, you coming downtown this week. 2 or 3 calls a week, then 6, then 9. He didn't have a website, hadn't thought about one. He had a phone number on a truck and 40 plates that sold out daily and a recipe book open on the prep counter every morning because cooking from it meant Joseph was in the truck with him. Dre set up the Facebook page on a Sunday afternoon while Devin prepped for Monday, just his phone as a camera. A photograph of the truck on Wells Street with the service window open, the name Joseph's Table, the menu in the first post. Daily location updates starting at 5 in the morning. 400 followers within 2 weeks, 1,200 within a month. People sharing posts, tagging friends, photographing their containers with captions. Best soul food in Atlanta, no question. This tastes like something my grandfather would have made on a Sunday. I drove 40 minutes to try this. Going back Thursday, $200 a day, consistent, 6 days a week. $1,200 a week before taxes. Devin kept writing in the composition notebook every night without missing a session. Tracking every dollar in and out the way Joseph had tracked every recipe, carefully, in ink, without shortcuts. The custody arrangement allowed Devin 2 afternoon visits per week, and every other weekend he brought food to every single visit. Packed it in foil containers the same way he packed orders for customers, sealed with tape so nothing spilled, carried in a cloth bag over his shoulder on the bus to Collier Road. He handed the bag to Jalen at the door because Devin was not permitted inside the house that used to be his. He sat on the porch steps and the children came out and they ate together in the open air. Nadia said the same thing every time with the certainty of someone making a statement of fact rather than offering a compliment. This is the best food in the world, Dad. Jalen ate with focus and didn't volunteer much, but one afternoon between bites he spoke in the low and careful voice of a 10-year-old who had been thinking about how to phrase something for a while. Mom asked why she was selling food out of a truck. Devin looked at his son. What did you tell her? Jalen considered the container in his hands. I told her it was really good. That was the ancestor of a boy who had more loyalty and more sense than the adults in his life deserved right then. Devin filed the motion for joint custody of Jalen and Nadia through Trey Holt on a Tuesday morning, 6 after the segment aired. Trey Holt was 33 years old. 3rd year at Atlanta Legal Aid's Family Law Division. Small office on the 4th floor of a building on Pryor Street where the air conditioning ran inconsistently and the waiting room chairs made a person feel slightly worse about their situation rather than better. He had a folder system that approached obsessive and a litigation style built entirely around specificity, documentary arguments over emotional ones. Because documents don't require a judge to believe anything, they require a judge to read. He looked at Devin's composition notebooks. Both of them. He looked at the vendor licenses and the food handler's permit and the commercial kitchen rental agreement and the truck lease with past Diane and the apartment lease on Memorial Drive and the 5 months of self-employment tax filings with revenue increasing in every single reporting period. He looked up from the folders. We have a case, he said, a real one. Devin nodded. Trey picked up his pen. Let's build it right. Roland Chase filed Celeste's response within 9 days, 37 pages. Devin read it at the kitchen table in the studio apartment at 11:30 at night. A glass of water he kept refilling without drinking all the way through to the end. Roland had taken the television segment. The 23,000 followers, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution piece, the 3 affiliates that had picked up the footage, and he had constructed an argument that Devin had prioritized public attention over parental stability. He had taken evidence of Devin's success and reframed it as evidence of Devin's unsuitability. Screenshots of 23,000 followers submitted as documentation of misplaced priorities. Joseph's Table described as an informal street food operation run by a man still living in a single-room studio, technically accurate. Up. Comprehensively dishonest in the way selective facts always are. Devin sat with the 37 pages for a long time after finishing. Up. Then he opened the composition notebook and wrote down everything he needed to get to Trey Holt by Friday. It was a long list. Up. He wrote it carefully, blue ink. The 2 weeks between and the hearing were the longest Devin had worked since he opened the truck. Up. Not longest in hours. The hours had always been long. 4 in the morning to 8 at night on a full operating day. But those hours had always moved with forward motion, each one producing something real. A plate handed out, a number written on the left page. A new face he would be able to anticipate the following week. These 2 weeks felt different. The work was the same. Church kitchen at 4 every Monday and Wednesday. Wells Street by 11:30. Downtown by 5. The line was longer than it had ever been because the segment was still circulating and new people were finding the truck every day. The numbers were the best they had ever been. And every evening when he drove back to the studio and locked the truck and went upstairs and sat at the kitchen table, the left page was doing exactly what he needed it to do. And none of that stopped the other thing from being there, the waiting. The knowing that 2 weeks from now there would be a room and a judge and a folder and a determination. And that Devin had done everything within his control and was now in the territory of things that weren't. So he cooked through it. That was what he had. Beyond the recipes and the handwriting and the margin notes, Joseph had given him something that wasn't a philosophy or a system of belief. Just the understanding that when the thing pressing on you is too large to address directly, you go to the stove. Work the thing you can control with full attention until the larger thing resolves itself or doesn't. And either way, you haven't spent the waiting time hollow and useless. You fed somebody. He called Jalen and Nadia every evening at 7:30. Jalen was 10 and had developed the economy of a boy with complicated feelings and insufficient vocabulary for them. Nadia was 7 and had no such limitation. She talked for as long as Devin would let her, about school, about her teacher, about the specific injustice of a bet at 30 minutes earlier than the kids in her class. Devin listened to every word. One evening, Jalen said something Devin carried through the rest of the 2 weeks without being able to set it down. They had been talking about a school assignment. Jalen answering in the clipped way of someone who considered homework an unreasonable intrusion on his time. Then a pause, and Jalen said quietly without preface, "Dad, I told Mom I want to come live with you." Devin was standing at the kitchen counter with the phone against his ear. He didn't answer immediately. He was careful with his words when it came to the children and the custody situation. Trey had been specific about that, because children repeat things and things get heard in courtrooms. And the wrong sentence from a parent to a child in an ongoing proceeding can become a data point in an argument you didn't intend to make. But this wasn't a legal question. This was his son telling him something true. "I heard you," Devin said. "That means more to me than I could say right now." Let the grown-ups sort out the details. You just worry about being 10. Jalen made the sound he made when processing something. A short exhale through the nose. Not quite a laugh. "That's not actually reassuring, Dad, I know. But it's true. I'll see you Thursday." He stood at the counter for a while after the call ended. Then he opened the recipe book to the corn muffin page and checked his prep list for tomorrow. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning. Courtroom on Pryor Street, the kind of room where consequential things happen without ceremony. Fluorescent light. Wooden furniture worn smooth by years of people in difficult situations leaning on it. A raised bench. A flag. A seal on the wall. Devin sat at the left table. Cecile sat at the right. She was wearing dark burgundy. Fitted at the waist, hair pinned back smooth and clean. The posture of someone who had walked into difficult rooms before and knew how to fill them without moving. They did not look at each other. Roland Chase went first, 55 years old and built for courtrooms in the way certain people are built for specific environments. Not physically imposing, organizationally formidable. He moved through the argument methodically, without emotion, each point connecting cleanly to the next. The television segment. Exhibit A, 23,000 followers as documentation of misplaced priorities. The studio apartment, insufficient space for 2 children. The first 2 months on a friend's couch. Each item delivered in the tone of someone reading from a list of established facts, because Roland had spent 14 months making sure they were. He did not mention the food handler's permit, did not mention the commercial kitchen certification, did not mention the truck lease or the vendor licenses or the 5 months of clean tax filings. Did not mention the court-appointed social worker's report. He mentioned none of those things, because each of them would have required him to describe Devin as what Devin actually was. Trey Holt went second, younger than Roland by 22 years, suit pressed, not remarkable. He opened his folder and presented the documents in the patient sequence of someone who has arranged evidence in the exact order that makes the most sense when received one after another. 5 months of self-employment tax filings, revenue increasing in every single reporting period without exception. The Memorial Drive lease, the food handler's permit. The commercial kitchen rental agreement with Greater Hope Baptist Church. The truck lease with Pastor Diane Morse. Vendor licenses for 3 separate markets. The court-appointed social worker's report from which Trey read 2 sentences aloud. The residence is clean, organized, and appropriate for overnight stays of children of the ages in question. The applicant demonstrates clear awareness of the children's needs and has prepared for their accommodation. And 23 handwritten letters from customers and community members. Each one arriving at the same conclusion through different words. This man works hard, this man feeds people, this man shows up. Then Trey addressed the television segment. He told the court that Ma Dawson had approached Devin as a customer before she approached him as a journalist. That Devin had not contacted the station. That Devin had mentioned neither Celeste nor the divorce proceedings in any portion of the broadcast. That the only party who had introduced legal conflict into the media coverage was Celeste herself, through the cease and desist letter Roland's office had sent. The letter that had prompted the station to expand the segment from 2 minutes to 8 and move it to prime time. The petitioner did not seek coverage, Trey said. He sold plates of food. Coverage found him, and when it did, the respondent's own legal action gave it the reach she's now using as evidence against him. He paused. The court should not penalize a man for the quality of what he built. Then Trey looked at Judge Elaine Morrow. I have one witness, Your Honor, if the court will permit. Roland objected. Morrow looked at him. Overruled. Devin didn't know who was coming. Trey had told him only that there was a witness whose testimony would be relevant, and that Devin should remain in his seat regardless of who came through the door. The courtroom door opened. Simone Grant walked in. Devin watched cross from the door to the front of the room. Dark blazer, knotless braids pinned back at the sides, hands loose at her eyes forward, the expression of someone who has already done the hardest part and is now simply finishing it. He hadn't known she was coming, hadn't known she'd called Trey, hadn't known any of it. 3 weeks earlier, after receiving the bank's notification that Celeste had withdrawn her name from the mortgage co-signing agreement without warning, Simone had sat in her car outside her own townhouse for 45 minutes. The bank had been direct. Without Celeste's name on the loan, Simone's current credit profile did not independently support the mortgage. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 11 days. 11 days, 3 years of work on that house, new fixtures she'd installed herself on a Saturday in February. Fresh paint in the kitchen. The garden in the back started from bare dirt, which was finally producing actual tomatoes. Celeste had pulled her name from the agreement because Simone had not forwarded information about the television segment quickly enough to be useful. Not because Simone had refused, not because she had told Devin what was happening, just because she'd been a few hours late. That was the calculation Celeste had made. Simone sat in that car for 45 minutes. Then she called Atlanta Legal Aid on Pryor Street and left a message for Trey Holt. Now she took the witness stand. Trey asked why she had maintained contact with Devin after the proceedings began. She said she had wanted to help. She believed what Celeste had done was wrong. She told Devin that and meant it. Trey asked whether, during the period of her contact with Devin, she had communicated information about him to Celeste. The courtroom went quiet. Not the quiet of a room between moments, the kind that means everybody already knows what's coming. Simone looked at the table in front of her. Then she looked up. Yes, one word. She didn't flinch delivering it. She said Celeste had instructed her to report on Devin's activities and made clear the mortgage co-signing would be withdrawn if she refused. She said she had complied for most of the proceedings. She said the information she provided included the food truck's name and location, the custody filing, the attorney's name, the reporter's identity and filming timeline. Trey asked what had changed. Simone said Celeste had withdrawn her name from the mortgage 6 weeks earlier. Without warning, without communication, because Simone had not forwarded information about the television segment quickly enough to be useful. She had lost the townhouse in Smyrna. Then she said something that wasn't in any document Trey had prepared. It came out flat. The voice of someone who has already used up all the feeling available on a subject and is left with only the facts. She used me to watch him, then she let me go when I wasn't useful anymore. A pause. That's what she does with people. The words landed and stayed. Nobody moved to address them. Trey placed 31 printed text messages before the court clerk. Dates, times, content, each one sent within 22 minutes of a conversation Simone had with Devin. The clerk distributed copies. Roland received his set. He looked at the first page. Then he looked at Celeste's. Then he looked back at the page with the expression of a man who has just found the load-bearing wall he didn't know existed until it began to give. Judge Elaine Morrow read the messages, all 31. Slowly and completely, the way judges read things when they intend to act on what they're reading. When she reached the last page, she set the stack down on the bench. A silence with actual duration, then it cheeked at Celeste's bull. Not at Roland, at Celeste directly, with the steady attention of someone who has formed a view and is now looking at its subject. The court has reviewed documentation showing that the respondent directed a third party to conduct ongoing surveillance of the petitioner during active custody proceedings. And used a financial instrument, specifically a mortgage co-signing agreement, as the mechanism of coercion. Roland began to speak. Morrow raised one hand. He stopped. The court does not find this consistent with the best interests of the children. She looked at both tables. Primary custody of Jalen and Nadia is transferred to the petitioner, effective immediately. The respondent retains visitation rights on a schedule this court will determine within 14 days. The respondent is also ordered to complete a parenting coordination assessment before the visitation schedule is finalized. She looked at Devin. The petitioner has demonstrated sustained income, appropriate housing, community support, and consistent engagement with both children throughout these proceedings. A pause that had wait. The court has seen enough. She closed the folder, called the next case. Devin walked out through the hallway and through the main doors and onto the steps outside. October morning, still warm. The kind of Atlanta fall that hasn't fully committed yet. The air carrying underneath it the first suggestion of what's coming. Not cold, just the reminder that warmth doesn't last without asking. He stood in the steps and looked at the parking lot on Pryor Street. Then he took out his phone and called Jalen. One ring. His son's voice and the careful tranquility of a 10-year-old who had learned not to show his hand first. Dad, you're coming home, Devin said. Both of you, this week. 3 seconds of each one had its own weight. Okay. The word came out thinner than Jalen's normal voice. The thinness of someone trying very hard not to cry in a situation where they weren't sure it was permitted. Whatever you're feeling right now, Devin said, that's exactly the right thing to feel. A breath. Then the practical voice Jalen used when he needed to move past something. When do we get our stuff? Devin almost laughed. Thursday morning. Tell Nadia. He hung up. Trey came out through the doors a minute later and stood beside him. They looked at the parking lot together without speaking for a while. Nice work, Devin finally said. Trey shook his head. Simone did the work. I asked the right questions. That was true. And also not the whole truth, but Devin wasn't going to argue with Trey Holt on a courthouse step in October when the light was doing something worth noticing on the asphalt. Go get your kids, Trey said. He went back inside. Devin stood on the steps 1 moment longer. Then he walked 2 blocks to the truck, got in and sat in the cab for a moment before starting the engine. He looked at the photograph taped to the wall beside the service window. Joseph Webb, 1985, white apron, flour-dusted hands. That expression. Not proud, not triumphant, just settled. The look of a man who knew what he was for and had never needed anyone else to confirm it. Devin started the engine. He drove to Wells Street and opened the service pincer window at 12:15, 50 minutes late. Big Earl was already at the wall, container in hand, eating something he'd apparently gotten from the sandwich cart. He looked up when the window opened. Looked at Devin, looked at the truck, said nothing for a moment. Then you look different. Devin pulled out the prep containers and started setting up. Good different or bad different. Big Earl considered this with the unhurried seriousness he applied to most things. Like somebody put something down they'd been carrying a while. Devin looked at him. Yeah, something like that. Big Earl dropped the half-eaten sandwich in the trash can by the wall. Give me the chicken, extra rice. Devin had it ready. Thursday morning, Devin drove to Collier Road, 9:15. 2 containers of food in the bag over his shoulder. He could not arrive somewhere important empty-handed. It was simply not possible. Jalen opened the door before Devin reached the top porch step, backpack at maximum capacity, 1 bag in each hand. The look of someone who had packed everything they owned the night before and had not slept particularly well afterward. I have 3 bags. I see 2s. There's one more inside. Go get it. Jalen disappeared. Nadia appeared from around the edge of the door frame. Smaller than Devin had let himself picture on the evenings when picturing her was too difficult. Wearing the blue jacket from first grade that was now genuinely too short in the sleeves and that she apparently refused to replace on principle. She looked at her father on the porch. I hid the cornbread in my sock drawer. I know how, Jalen told me. Jalen wasn't some...
Nothing stays in the house for long.
Bring the cornbread. Nadia turned and went back inside. Devin stood on the porch. He looked at the front of the house he had lived in for 11 years. Up the door, the porch rail, the window of the kitchen visible at the far left corner of the front face. 11 years of mornings beginning in that kitchen. 11 years of the same stove and the same counter. The backyard where the children had spent entire summers. He looked at it the way you look at something you no longer need. Not without feeling, but without the ache of wanting it back. It was a house. It had been his home because of the people inside it. The people were coming with him. The studio apartment on Memorial Drive was 850 square feet. Devin had furnished it over 5 months. A bed, a kitchen table with 4 chairs, a bookshelf, a couch from a resale place on Glenwood Avenue, genuinely comfortable, only slightly worn at the left armrest. He had moved a second mattress into the bedroom the morning after the hearing, pushed his own bed against the wall, set up the second one perpendicular. Fresh sheets on both, 2 pillows sized for children, a small fan on the windowsill because Nadia slept better with air moving. A lamp on the side table between the beds. He had to set the kitchen table with 3 place settings that morning. 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 forks, not 4. 4 would have been aspirational in a particular sad direction. 3 was exactly what he had. When the children came through the door that afternoon, Jalen went directly to the couch and dropped onto it with the away from someone who's been holding tension in their body for months. Santana's finally found a surface where they can put it down. He didn't say anything. He just sat there and breathed. Nadia walked through every room in the apartment in a systematic loop. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living area, with the focused inventory of seeing someone who needs to understand a space before she can inhabit it. Then she came back to the kitchen and stood at the counter and looked at the recipe book on the shelf above the stove. Is that the book from the truck? Same book. The one your grandfather wrote. The one he wrote. Nadia looked at it for a moment. Can I touch it? Devin took it down and handed it to her. She held it in both hands, turned it over once. Felt the leather cover the way children touch things that belong to a world older than their own. Carefully, as though the object might remember being held. It's really old. It really is. What's inside? Every good thing I know how to make, and notes from a man who knew more about cooking than anyone I've ever met. Nadia opened the cover. The photograph slid out and landed in her palm. Joseph Webb, 1985, white apron, flour-dusted hands. Smiling the way he always smiled in that photograph, like someone who understood something essential and was entirely at peace about it. Not proud, just settled he. That is the man who taught me everything I know. His name was Joseph Webb. He was my grandfather. And you have the same expression he has in that photograph when you're about to say something that turns out to be right. Nadia considered this with full seriousness. I look like an old man in an apron. You look like someone who knows something. She handed the book back, satisfied with that answer, and went to claim her side of the bedroom. Devin set the photograph back inside the front cover, placed the recipe book on the shelf above the stove, where it had always been in every kitchen he had ever owned. That evening, Devin made the red beans and rice. Page 1, the first thing Joseph had ever written down, with the margin note Devin had read in the dark on Dre's couch almost a year ago. This one is for when somebody comes home. He started the beans at 4 in the afternoon, made the roux the slow way. 20 minutes over medium heat, stirring without stopping. Not rushing the color because you cannot rush the color without destroying the foundation of the dish. Joseph's note at the top of the page. The roux is either right or it isn't. There is no recovering from a bad roux. Do it right the first time. Jalen came into the kitchen at 4:30. He didn't ask to help, didn't announce himself. Just pulled a chair out from the table and sat down with a backpack and opened it like he was going to do homework. He didn't do homework. He watched Devin cook in the sideways way of a boy who wants to be in the room but doesn't want to make it a thing. Devin let him be there, didn't comment on it. What's the brown stuff in the pan? Jalen asked it eventually, like the question had been sitting there waiting long enough. Roux, base for the beans. What's it made of? Flour and fat, cooked together until they change. How do you know when it's done? Devin didn't answer right away. He waited until the smell shifted. Then he tilted the pan slightly toward Jalen. Smell it. Jalen leaned in, pulled back with the expression of someone whose senses have understood something before their mind has caught up. I've never smelled that before. You have, Devin said, every time I made the beans. You just didn't know what you were smelling until right now. Jalen looked at the pan. That's the thing you said, about recognizing something you've never had, that's the thing. Jalen pulled his chair closer to the counter. Didn't say anything else, just watched. Nadia came in at 5:30 and set the table without being asked, 3 places. Arranged with a precision that was slightly excessive and somehow exactly right. Devin served at 6:15. Pot on a folded dish towel in the center of the table, family style, the way Joseph had always done it. Not portioned out in the kitchen, set in the middle for people to take what they needed. Cornbread in the cast iron pan beside it, still warm from the oven. They sat down. Jalen served himself without comment. Nadia watched Devin serve himself, then served herself a portion that was, Devin noted without saying a word, significantly larger than what a 7-year-old typically required. She was Joseph's great-granddaughter in certain unmistakable ways. The first few minutes were quiet, and though good food makes typical quiet. Not because there's nothing to say, because eating has taken priority. And that priority is correct. Devin watched his children eat. He looked at the shelf above the stove, the recipe book, the edge of the photograph just visible inside the front cover. Nadia set down her fork. She looked at Devin with the direct and settled gaze she'd had since she was 2 years old. This is the best food in the world, Dad. Same words, same voice, different place entirely. Not a porch step. Not a visit with a clock running. Not a foil container handed through a door of a house he was not permitted to enter. Home. Jalen didn't say anything. He reached for more cornbread. Devin took that as the higher compliment, from a person who doesn't need to announce that something is good because he is too busy continuing to eat it. 6 months later, Pastor Diane Morse told Evans the truck was his. March, prep table in the church basement. Same table where she had told him about Thomas and the top-covered truck the previous September. She slid a handwritten bill of sale across the table. $4,500, the price Thomas paid in 2008. Devin looked at it. He had the money. Had been holding it since November, when the revenue had stabilized enough that saving became possible rather than theoretical. He wrote the check at the church table. Pastor Diane held it without folding it, looked at it for a moment. Thomas would have liked you. He would have argued with you about seasoning for 6 months and eventually admitted you were right about the catfish. What would he have said was wrong with it? Too much time on the brine. He was a paprika man. She put the check in her jacket pocket. He wasn't as right about that, but he was right about most things. Even picked up the bill of sale, his name on it, Joseph's table. The truck he had driven 5 days a week for 7 months. The truck with the photograph beside the service window. The truck that smelled like cast iron and brown butter every morning before the first customer arrived. Now his fully and legally, no one else's name on it but his own. He folded the bill of sale and put it in his jacket. April, a Sunday afternoon. Jalen made the corn muffins for the first time. He had asked to come along to the church kitchen while Devin prepped for Monday. Devin said yes. Jalen sat on a stool at the prep counter and watched for 40 minutes, then can I try the muffins? Devin set him up with the recipe book open to page 63. Ingredients arranged in order. Then he stepped back. Didn't interrupt, didn't correct, just watched. Waiting only for an unrecoverable error, which Joseph had defined as an error you cannot fix, as opposed to an error that simply produces a less perfect result. Both worth knowing about. Only one required intervention. The muffins came out slightly uneven, one side higher than the other from batter not distributed evenly before baking. Devin waited until they cooled, cut one open, handed half to Jalen. Jalen ate it, made the face of a 10-year-old waiting to be graded. Well, good, Devin said. Just good. Flavor is right. Distribution is off. One side higher than the other. That's technique. Not recipe. Technique is fixable. How? Wet spoon. Level the batter before you close the oven 10 seconds every time. That Joseph's? Mine. I figured that one out the hard way around your age. Jalen picked up the pen from the counter and wrote in the margin of page 63. Careful letters, blue ink, sloping slightly to the right, in a way that belonged to this family and no one else. Devin watched him write and didn't say a word about the handwriting. He just watched. The following October, Mrs. Loretta Hines came back to the East Atlanta Village Market on a Sunday morning. 1 year and 2 weeks after the hearing, she bought her usual container and stood at the service window while Devin assembled it. A recipe book open on the prep counter beside him, same as every week. She watched him work for a moment. About a year now, since the TV piece. About that, Devin said. She looked at the truck, the brown paint. The gold lettering, the line forming behind her. Where do you think you'll be next year? Devin handed her the container. He thought about it honestly, not performing the consideration, actually taking it seriously. Same place, he said, different people to feed. She nodded, the slow nod of someone who recognizes as a right answer. That's a good answer. It's Joseph's answer. I'm just the one saying it. She took her container to the spot at the edge of the market tables where she always ate, standing with her back to the morning sun facing the street. And Devin turned back to the prep counter and opened the recipe book to the next page. The October light came in at the flat angle that belongs to fall in Atlanta. The angle that makes everything look slightly more resolved than it is, slightly more settled into what it was always going to become. He thought about Celeste. Not with anger, not anymore. He thought about her the way you think about weather that passed a long time ago, not what it felt like when you were standing in it, but what it changed about the landscape after it was gone. She had understood financial instruments and legal structures and the architecture of how assets move between names on documents. She had operated a 14-month strategy with a precision that deserved its own cold acknowledgement. She had taken the house and the car and 12 years of his labor and erased his name from every instrument that carried legal weight. And she had still missed the only thing that mattered, because it was never on paper. You cannot file a motion against what a man learned standing on a stool at age 5 with a wooden spoon too large for his hand. You cannot transfer the knowledge that lives in the hands. You cannot lock a recipe book in a trust. She left him with $300 because her attorney said it wasn't worth the paperwork. She was wrong about that. The truck was his. The book was open. The children were home, and somewhere on page 63, in careful blue ink sloping slightly to the right, a 10-year-old boy had added the 179th note to a book that had been growing for 31 years. That was the thing she had never seen sitting on that shelf above the microwave, not a collection of recipes. A conversation across time. One that nobody, not a lawyer, not a judge, not 14 months of careful preparation could interrupt. Devin put his hands on the prep counter. He opened the book to the next page. He started cooking.